Now, we're going to go to House Bill 3539. Representative Caldwell, you're recognized to present your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So members, 3539 would simply, how's the best to explain it? So we would focus on the minimum salary schedule, and it would be based on, we would set one base label based on your educational level, bachelor's degree, master's degree, doctorate, those kind of things, and to do away with the years of experience part. And we would put all of that back on, we would put 100% of that decision back on the local district. We would take the state out of the salary setting business. Be happy to answer any questions.
Members, are there any questions? Representative, I've got a question for you. So would you say by doing it this way, this would be pushing things back to the local districts for local control?
It's 100%. We've heard local control a lot today. We just talked about with the superintendent bill. I think that failed, if I remember correctly. I think most of the concerns were based on taking it out of the local control, but that's exactly what we've done with our teacher salary. We have put that decision at the state level rather as opposed to the local level. I don't know if the members would be surprised to know this or not, but Oklahoma is one of 17 states in the country that have a minimum salary schedule like we do. None of the top 10 states by teacher pay have a minimum salary schedule, while all 5 of the bottom states do and 7 of the 10. So I feel like we need to push that decision out to the local level, and I think it will help our teachers.
Do you feel like this would be burdensome for school districts to do this, or do you believe that every district's different? And I'll give you an example. My school district in Broken Arrow, which has roughly 19,000 plus students, already sets their own pay based on some of their principals, administrators, as well as many districts already currently do this, who pay above the minimum salary schedule. Do you think this is a burdensome practice? Do you think this is something they can easily adopt?
No, it's something they can easily adopt. I mean, in fact, I mentioned there were none of the top 10. The highest ranked teacher pay state in the country is Illinois. At, I think, number 12, their minimum teacher pay is $10,000 a year, and it hasn't been addressed in 30 years, so it's basically gone away. If you look at the districts, they would actually still have the ability, if they think it is beneficial to them, then Enid Public Schools or Edmond Public Schools or whatever it would be, would have that ability to set their own salary schedule as opposed to us doing it at the state level. The reality is that if a group of private businesses got together and did the exact same thing that the state does with their employees, we would call that collusion, and that's illegal. But when it comes to education, we have no problem doing it. And the problem is, by doing it this way, we've actually created an artificial market and have actually suppressed the salaries of our teachers.
Representative Kennedy, you're recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess my question is, and maybe it's because of my age and years of experience, does that not need to be protected based on a salary schedule based on years of experience? I guess that's the first thing that kind of flashed at me here, was that those teachers that many times transfer in, they won't transfer in if they're starting at square one.
Well, they wouldn't be starting at square one. They would be starting at whatever the district would decide to pay them. So as opposed to as it is right now, the state is telling that district, when that teacher transfers in, sorry, I'm trying to look at you and talk in the microphone, when that teacher transfers in, we've created the market, we've established and told that district basically, here's what you're going to pay them. As opposed to, so with me, I run a hospice, so when I have a nurse that comes talk to me, I don't have to look up what the minimum salary schedule is for a nurse. I figure out what the market is, and if I want to get a quality nurse to come work for me, I've got to pay them a quality wage to attract them to come over. So by doing this way, we're putting 100% of the emphasis and the authority back on our local districts. And instead of telling them and creating an artificial floor that actually lowers that, we're competing. Because my hope is, again, even though the last bill went down, my hope is that we're going to drive teacher pay by doing this way. So we've got 2 neighboring districts possibly, and they've got maybe there's a teacher that wants to transfer in. I'd love it if they get in a bidding war over, for Pete's sake, and or him, and they'd end up making more money. So they can do it however they want to do it. It just gives them more freedom and more local control. We don't have a salary schedule for our superintendents. We don't have a salary schedule unless they've decided to set one for their principals. So we've given that authority back to our school boards and back to our superintendents as far as that personnel, but we've decided that they're either incompetent, or I don't know what the thought process was exactly, but we've taken that authority away from them when it comes to our teachers. So this drives that decision back to them. So for that very situation that you just talked about, instead of the state, who I don't know, your district and my district are going to be totally different. Why is the state dictating to our districts that we basically have to pay that teacher the same wage?
For a follow-up.
Thank you, and I'm beginning to understand where you're coming from. I'm thinking in my area, probably it's the second most rural in the state, and as a result, would we be able to be competitive with other districts, urban districts? I guess that's just thoughts that's run through my mind.
Sure, and I think, do we want to make sure that everybody is equal at a very low level? If that's our goal, then we've accomplished it, and yay us. If we want to keep everybody at a real low level, fair play, we have done it, we should all high five. If we want to pay our teachers a competitive wage and make them market-based and encourage our districts, competition is what drives our country. The free market and free enterprise drives our market and our businesses and everything else other than education. I think it's odd that we've decided, and again, not even in education, because again, if our districts are competing for a superintendent, we're going to compete, and my district may be able to pay more for that same superintendent. But the state hasn't stepped in and said, no, we're going to set this. So let's see, you came in and you're a superintendent with 5 years of experience. Well, you're going to make $100,000. We don't do that. We don't do that. If you're a principal, we don't say, here's what you're going to do. But we have said, you know what? If you've got a teacher with 5 years of experience, here you go. We're going to set that market for you. And all that's doing is keeping our teacher wages low. So my goal is to, again, give as much authority and autonomy back to those local districts. We've talked a lot, like I said, about local control. If we really want local control, then this is it. If we don't want local control, then we probably should ask Representative Enns back in here and maybe take that vote back up, and let's at least be consistent.
Representative Nolan, you're recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is, how would this, or would it at all, have any impact on the pension system? How would they interact?
To be honest with you, Representative, as far as I know, I don't think it would be a problem with that, but I'd have to go in and, I'd have to go back and reread the TRS statute to see, but I don't think it would affect that at all.
Representative Hinkie, you're recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Representative, I understand what your intent is, but just devil's advocate here, is there any concern, given our current budget situation and the fact that schools are already hurting for money, is there any concern that teachers could then be paid the bare minimum in an effort to save money?
No, there's actually a prohibition against that very thing in the bill that says that they can't make less money than they're currently making. It says in here that whatever their current salary is, they can't. So if a teacher's making $35,000 right now, the superintendent and the board couldn't come back in and say, we're now going to lower your pay. Whatever your pay is this year, it can't go below that.
Follow up.
But if you're a new teacher, coming into the school system, but you've taught for 10 years somewhere else.
So my guess is, just like it is with pretty much every other business, say a bank, hypothetically, for example, a bank executive doesn't sit there and have to go and look up the state statute to find how much to pay their tellers or their vice president of lending or whatever it would be. And if they're going to give them a crummy offer and say, we're going to pay you bottom dollar, my guess is that guy's going to go somewhere else. And it's the same thing with our schools. I think our schools want the best teachers they can get. And so I'll just give you, we've got Oklahoma City Public Schools right down the road, just gave their teachers a pay raise. We didn't give them any more money, they just did it. Enid Public Schools, since the end of last year, has given every teacher a raise and a $1,000 bonus. We didn't give them any more money, but they just were able to do those type things. Those show me that districts want good teachers. And like any business, they want to retain their quality employees. If this was truly good for the employees, private businesses depend on quality employees because that money goes back into the owner or the board's pocket. So they want to make sure that they've got their best people working for them. If this was truly for the benefit of the employee, private businesses would do the same thing, if it was legal, which is not. So with this, again, my argument is, and the data backs it up, it can't be a coincidence that 7 out of the 10 lowest states in the country for teacher pay all have a system like ours. All of the bottom 5, 7 of the last 10, none of the top 10. And in fact, if you discount Illinois, which I said their salary schedule hasn't been updated in 30 years, I think there are 4 states in the top 30 for teacher pay that have a salary schedule like this. So the one thing we can't say is that this has protected our teacher pay. It certainly hasn't increased it. It hasn't protected it. And I think the data shows it's actually done the exact opposite, which is suppressed our teacher pay. So I think our teachers will benefit. I am very confident that they will benefit when we have districts out there truly competing for them.
For follow-up.
And I completely agree with what you're saying. However, if we are continuing to be in a situation where we don't have enough teachers in the pipeline, we've got emergency certified teachers, we're essentially trying to find warm bodies for the classroom. If we're in that situation, just a completely unintended consequence of the bill, do you think that teachers that are looking to join the teaching profession are going to look at this and say, you know, I'm not going to be guaranteed this amount of money, so I just might not even try? No,
because 33 states in the country either have no minimum salary schedule or have a salary schedule just like this one. So the majority of the states are doing it the exact opposite of what we're doing. The only states that are doing it the way we're doing are the ones that are on the bottom tier of the teacher pay. So I don't think that at all. I think what will actually happen is that you'll start finding neighboring districts with the freedom, and again, it totally goes back. It's 100% local control. So again, let me just say, if your district or my district decides, no, we really believe that a minimum salary schedule is truly to the benefit of our teachers, and if that would be a recruiting tool, then they could institute their own minimum salary schedule. I mean, if everybody else doesn't do it and they do it, then by that theory, every new college graduate would flock to that district that has a minimum salary schedule. So they could do it. But at least that way we're letting that salary schedule be up to the decision of the board and true local control, as opposed to those of us at 23 in Lincoln saying we're the salary czars for public education. We've decided that we know better than the local school board and the local superintendent. I don't think that's the case. My district, your district, Representative Kennedy's district, all very different. So let's let them individually set it. Let's give them that flexibility. And I truly believe that you will see an increase in teacher pay like you have in virtually every other school or every other state that doesn't have a schedule like we currently do.
Representative, I got a question for you. Are you aware that Texas's minimum salary schedule for beginning teachers is considerably lower than Oklahoma's?
I was aware of that.
Are you also aware that they don't give additional salary based on their minimum salary schedule for a master's degree or doctorate degree?
I was.
And I think all of us in this room, as well as many Oklahomans, would also agree, and we hear it pretty regularly, that our teachers coming out of college are fleeing to Texas. So wouldn't you say also that Texas has, even though they have a minimum salary schedule, they are not living by their minimum salary schedule and they are actually making decisions on the local level?
Correct.
Representative Kennedy, you're recognized for a question.
Thank you. And a little bit of this is following up on previous questions, and it takes me back in time. Graduated 1968, 69 with a master's, and Oklahoma was paying $5,000 a year. And at that time, I took a job for $10,000 a year in Wisconsin. However, what happened, and now Oklahoma was not short of teachers at that time. But in time, in the years, 50 years, we're short of teachers now because of that competition. Won't we have that same thing within the state? Purim, Oklahoma, down here, Enid, up here, et cetera, et cetera. This is, like I kind of indicated earlier, it seems like, yes, competition is good, but can it also be harmful in some areas.
You know, you bring up an interesting point. I guess my response to that is, again, so I run a hospice, and I've got to compete with hospices throughout the state. I don't have nurses from throughout the state coming and beating down my door, willing to relocate their families 5 hours to come do that. So my guess is, now I do have to compete with the other healthcare providers in my community, and in surrounding communities, I've got to pay them a wage. So I think there may be some, maybe I'm going to call it more regional competition. But again, I think it's an interesting argument that we would have to make if we don't do something like this, which is, look, we think the free marketplace is great, except for our teachers. Free market is great for our superintendents. Free market is great for our principals. But the free market is really, really bad for our teachers. I can't get there. Myself, I just can't get there. So what my hope is that my guess is maybe that we might be competing, Enid and Porn maybe competing for a teacher. My guess is that's not likely. I'm not going to pick on your area because I'm not as familiar with your geography, so I apologize. I'll pick my own. So my hope is that Enid Public Schools and Chisholm Public Schools and Hennessy and Wacomas and on, if we've got a teacher that's available, we got a vacancy that we need to fill. I mean, what a great thing if we had like I said, a bidding war break out for a math teacher. I mean, boy, that would be awful. I mean, so so that from that perspective, I don't think competition is going to be bad at all.
For a follow-up.
Just very briefly on that, and I agree with that principle of competition that can be, and I hope if this does take place, that it won't be, say for example, to go back to my experience on the $10,000 a year, and the second year we went on a labor strike. The fourth year we went on a labor strike. Guess where I went? Back to Oklahoma because of other situation. And I guess that's the problem. When you give that freedom to the local district, are you not opening up things that we are accustomed to, more organized control?
Well, I don't think that's not, I'll just be honest with you, that's not a concern of mine, but I think this committee just voted overwhelmingly that wasn't a concern with our superintendents, because the same things, the same things would be true, and I think overwhelmingly this committee just voted to say, no, those decisions should be based on a local level. We're willing to take that risk because we believe in local control. So we either have to be total hypocrites here today and say, we're really for local control, except we're not for local control. So we're either for it or not, and we're either for competition or we're not. If competition is good enough for your superintendent, I don't understand why competition wouldn't be good enough for your teacher. And I'm not saying that's what you're making, and I understand where your concern is coming from, but I'm going to flip it on you and say, here's the other great thing, and maybe Wisconsin had a minimum salary schedule at the time. I don't know if they did or not. But what you got to do is you had the ability to make a decision based on what was best for you and your family, and you got to go just double your salary living in the beautiful state of Wisconsin, and you got to make that decision. And because of that, you got to make a financial decision. I'm sure there were other factors, but a financial decision, because they wanted to attract great teachers like yourself, so that's how much they were paying. I think we are giving ourselves an opportunity to do that. Let me be very clear. Is this a silver bullet that's going to fix everything? Absolutely not. I think I voted on a teacher pay raise roughly 619 times in the last 2 years in this building. Between committee and on the floor and everything else, I voted yes every single time. So am I for a teacher pay raise? Absolutely. Let's put more money in it. I just ran a bill that we rank an abysmal 48th in the country in the percentage of dollars we put in the classroom. That's embarrassing. 48th in the country for percentage of dollars we put in the classroom. It was defeated, but the same thing goes true. This isn't a silver bullet, but we've got to give more an opportunity, and let's give our local districts an opportunity to say, look, if Enid or Porham really cares, then let's give them the local control to say, you know what? We're going to come in and we're going to pay our teachers more. We're going to pay, and it can be based on all kinds of different factors. It leaves it 100% open to what the district wants to do. And again, if the district really feels that our current system is so magnificent, then they can do the exact same thing.
Representative Nolan, you're recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Caldwell, I'm looking at this and taking in what you're saying, and I think you make some good points. My question is, how is it different than what we do now? Because honestly, I mean, we have school districts all over our state that pay above the minimum pay schedule now, and they do that to recruit teachers, and they can also incentivize them with stipends, and so there's already the opportunity to compete for those great teachers, and it's an opportunity for the teachers too. So help me understand how it's really different than what we have available.
Thank you for that question. And I think the way I would answer your question is, my numbers may be a little bit off, so if you'll give me a little bit of wiggle room here, but I want to say about 5 or 6% of our districts, I think, pay above the salary schedule. So we have an overwhelming majority that don't. In fact, I think Representative Rogers had to run a bill last year that stopped people from using the flex benefits to actually pay underneath our minimum salary schedule. So we have roughly, I'm going to say, again, give or take, 93 to 95% of our schools, I believe, our districts are paying at the minimum salary schedule. And again, if you took 95% of the industry and they all got together and decided to come together on what they're going to pay their employees, that'd be against the law. It just is. But in education, we give it a thumbs up.
For a follow-up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So if that be the case, I mean, I'm just thinking this through, and we remove this, then isn't there a chance that the 95% that are paying the minimum now would look for the opportunity to pay less? I mean, when we take this out, I think it strikes a little bit of fear in our educators already, even though your intentions, I think, are good. You know what I'm saying? And so I'm wondering, how that might have an unintended consequence.
So again, they couldn't pay less. So the starting salary stays the same for each education level. And I would love to see that base level raised. There's a bill, there's a line in there that says if we pass a teacher pay raise this year, that this would automatically be, the base would be raised to go up that amount as well to incorporate that. So I'd love to see the base increased, but it's impossible. We're not lowering we're not doing away with anything. We're basically saying this is the minimum wage, just like we do in business. We say here's a federal minimum wage. And as long as you're paying more than whatever, 7.25, whatever it is now, as long as you pay above that, you're good. That's what we're doing here. As long as you pay above the minimum, you're good. And again, if for the teachers that are in there right now, they can't lose money in this deal.
For a follow-up.
But for new hires, they could start out at a lower rate.
No. Because it retains the same minimum. If a teacher was hired last year and if this went into effect and a teacher was hired next year, the same minimum is in place, the exact same minimum. They cannot we're not lowering the minimum that they have, the statutory minimum that's in place right now would be the same statutory minimum going forward. We're not changing that at all. It's right, it's right, and I can have you look at it, but it's right here. The minimum doesn't change. It changes after. It changes on the first step, the second step, not the baseline. So new teachers aren't going to make any less than a new teacher would be making now. They're going to come in at the exact same salary. And again, I've hired a new nurse right out of school. They're going to. I've got to compete with them, and if I don't continue to keep up with their wages and I don't pay them a competitive wage, they've got options. They're not going to stick with me. And I've got all kinds of different ways to incentivize them to stay, but pay is a big one. I think we all know that. That's why we want to address teacher pay. So if we really want to address it, let's take the shackles off.
I see what you're saying.
Representative Caldwell, I got one more question for you. You did mention the bill that we ran last year, and it was a good segue for kind of what I was thinking, and I'll clarify for some people who don't remember that bill. But basically, in current statute, you can pay below the minimum salary schedule as long as the district portion of the TRS, if the district pays your part of the TRS, in combined is above the minimum salary schedule. So currently, school districts can pay below the minimum salary schedule. Is that correct?
I believe that is correct.
And also currently, and I think everybody in this room will agree, and I just double checked the numbers to make sure, we are 49th in the country in teacher pay. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So sometimes in education, our biggest fear is the unknown, the fear of, well, this could be catastrophic, this could be this or that. But if you trace back and look at the Oklahoma over the last 30 years in teacher pay, would it shock you to know that we've been in the 40s, mid to late 40s, in almost every demographic of teacher pay. So to me, and something I teach my boys in baseball, is sometimes when something's not working, try something dramatic and do something different. Because currently the way, and Representative Nolan has stated it perfectly, districts currently can pay above the minimum salary schedule right now anyway. So this doesn't affect their ability to do that. It actually gives them the opportunity to pay more if they'd like, but still leaves in that baseline of the minimum to make sure that any fear of superintendent coming in and paying someone $25,000 is not in there.
Correct, and I think it just actually encourages them to pay above. It encourages them to pay more by instead of the state of Oklahoma setting the market for our teachers, we're letting the free market set the market for our teachers. I've heard a lot about our teachers leaving to go either out of state or other professions. Why do they go to other professions? Because the market demands they can go make more money there. So that's what they do. So again, those are all things that go with the free market. And you mentioned Texas. You can go on and on and on. There's a whole long list of states that, clearly we rank 49th, like you said. This salary structure has not driven teacher pay. It just hasn't. It hasn't done it in Oklahoma. It hasn't done it in Mississippi. It hasn't done it in 7 of the 10 states that rank in the bottom 40. It just doesn't do it.
So one more follow-up. Do you feel like the fear then would shift that maybe teachers wouldn't trust their local board and their local superintendent to maintain the status quo on teacher pay? Or where do you think that fear comes from?
My guess is that, I don't know. You would hope that wouldn't be the case. But at least if that's the case, then there are remedies for that. If we truly, again, if we're going to believe in local control, let's just be consistent. Let's believe in local control. Because we have a remedy. We're always told we got to have local control because we have a remedy for that. We have a locally elected school board. So if my locally elected school board is not doing a good job in competing for teachers, then we can address that. We can address and how they deal with the superintendent. We have these protections in there that aren't working. So let's take the shackles off and let's go compete for our teachers.
Representative Dollins, you recognize?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative, my concern is we don't have the revenue that other states as Texas have. So how can we compete and say one teacher gets more than another if we don't have the means to do so? And to follow up on that, my question is, who would determine which teacher gets a pay raise? Is that set by the superintendent, or does a principal determine, I find this teacher more valuable than this teacher, so I'm going to take from that salary to give to this salary?
Well, 2 questions. There was 2 questions, so let me go to the first one. The first one, like I said, is we clearly, some of our districts have found a way to do it. Oklahoma City just did it. Enid Public Schools just did it. A teacher pay raise for every teacher and a $1,000 bonus. So clearly some of our districts are doing it. So I'm not sure that we can say that we don't have the ability to do it. I'm not sure I would agree with that. Because obviously there are plenty of examples of districts, not just those 2. Those are the 2 that I know off the top of my head that just did it within the last 6 months or so. Remind me your second question. I'm sorry.
You recognize?
Thank you, Chair. Who determines the pay for each teacher?
And great. Again, the beauty of this is who determines it are the people that should be determining it, which is the local district. And that district can set their policy. So you're not taking, again, you're not going to take away, you're not going to say, well, Mr. Swanson, the PE teacher, you were making this, I'm going to take that money away from you and give it to somebody else. It doesn't work that way. In the same way we don't do that with if you've got a principal at Emerson Junior High School and one at Waller Junior High School, you're not saying, we're not worried about them taken from one and given to the other. We can let them, they can pay them different amounts. So again, if it's good for some, I don't understand why is it that teachers are like this alien life form, that they're different than every other educator. If it's good for superintendents, if we think our boards are smart enough to be able to figure out a 6-figure salary for our highest paid district employees, why are they too stupid to figure out what we should pay a teacher? I just reject that argument. So let's give them the authority, let's give them that local control.
Seeing no further questions, do I hear a motion? Do pass. Will there be a second? Second. Where will there be debate? Seeing no debate, we'll open up the queue for a vote. Declare the vote.
9 aye, 4 nay.
Representative with 9 aye, 4 nay will report your bill to have passed.